بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين أما بعد. Today inshallah ta'ala in this clip we're going to speak about two of the Imams of the Qur'an. We spoke in the last clip, mentioned some of the unique qualities of the great Imam, Nafi', the Imam of Al-Madinah Al-Munawwara. The second Imam that we're going to look at, his name is Abdullah ibn Kathir al-Makki. Abdullah ibn Kathir, who was the Imam of Makkah in the generation of the Salaf of the early Muslims with the Qur'an. Just before mentioning a couple of points about him, there's two Ibn Kathirs when we come to speak of the Qur'an. There's Ibn Kathīr al-Qari and there's Ibn Kathir al-Mufassir. There's Ibn Kathir, the reciter of the Qur'an, who's from the generation of the Tabi'een, Kibar al-Tabi'een, the leading Tabi'een. But then you have the famous Ibn Kathir, the author of the famous tafsir. He comes centuries later, over 7 centuries later. So now whilst we're speaking about the biographies, the Imams of the Qur'an, we're speaking about Ibn Kathir of Makkah, who was born in the year 45 after Hijrah. He's from the earliest of the generations, 45 after Hijrah. In Makkah al-Mukarramah, he meets Abdullah ibn Zubayr, he meets Abu Ayyub al-Ansari, he meets Sayyidina Anas ibn Malik. So he meets some of the leading of all the companions of An-Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And his recital of the Qur'an, going back to the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, was how the people of Makkah, they used to recite the Qur'an. On the way of Abdullah ibn Kathir, the transmission that came from him, from the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Such that it's reported by Imam al-Shafi'i, who comes a generation or two later. Imam al-Shafi'i used to praise so much the recital of Abdullah ibn Kathir, and he would say, these are the words of Imam al-Shafi'i, قراءتنا قراءة Abdullah ibn Kathir وعليها وجدت أهل مكة. He said, our reading is a reading of Abdullah ibn Kathir, and we found the people of Mecca upon this. Ibn Mujahid, a later Imam of the Qur'an from the 4th century, he says, Abdullah ibn Kathir remained as the Imam of Qur'an whose recitation was agreed upon amongst the people of Mecca until he died in the year 120 after Hijrah. He was the great Imam of Mecca with the Qur'an. And just one quality and one description of Abdullah ibn Kathir. He used to consider himself to be nothing. He used to humble himself with people like him, people who love the Qur'an and love to practice the religion. He used to lower himself in the presence and used to humble himself. Because he's from the people of the Qur'an, he lived the meanings of the Qur'an, and he would always honor the poor. He would honor the poor and wealthy people of this world. He would turn away from them and he preferred not to be in their presence. That's the great Imam of Makkah al-Mukarramah in the generation of the Salaf, the early Muslims, Abdullah ibn Kathir. He has 2 main transmitters who transmit his reading of the Qur'an going back to the Prophet ﷺ. The first one, Ahmad ibn Muhammad, just commonly known as Al-Bazzi, who's born in the year 170 after Hijrah in Makkah, and Al-Bazzi in Makkah became the Imam of Al-Masjid al-Haram, and the Mu'adhin and the Imam of the Blessed Masjid for 40 years. That's the transmitter of Ibn Kathir, Al-Bazzi, who transmits the Qur'an from him. The second narrator from Abdullah ibn Kathir, his name is Muhammad ibn Abdul Rahman, commonly known as Qumbul, and he's considered to be the most precise transmitter of the recital of Ibn Kathir, of Abdullah ibn Kathir. Then moving on, Imam number 3, Abu Amr al-Basri. Abu Amr al-Basri. He is commonly known amongst the Imams of Qur'an as Abu Amr al-Basri, who was born in Makkah in the year 70 after Hijrah. He heard the Qur'an directly from companions of the Prophet ﷺ, such as Anas ibn Malik radiyallahu anhu ardah. He was one of the great Imams of the Qur'an and one of the great Imams of Arabic language. Just to mention one thing about Abu Amr al-Basri. As we find the way of the Imams of the Qur'an who had this unique relationship with the Qur'an, he would finish the whole of the Qur'an every 3 nights. Every 3 nights, meaning every 3 days he will do khatm al-Qur'an. 10 juz a day. 10 juz a day, he will recite the Qur'an, and for the people of the Qur'an, there's no difficulty. Why? وَقُرَّةُ عَيْنِ فِي الصَّلَاةِ. Did not the beloved sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, did he not say that the coolness of my eye, my pleasure is in the prayer? What's the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam doing in the prayer? He's reading Qur'an and Qur'an and Qur'an. The people of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala love to be with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They love to be reading the Qur'an. So when we hear Sayyidina Uthman finish the Qur'an 1 rak'ah at night, Abu Amr al-Basri finishes the whole Qur'an in 3 days, 10 juz. Why? Because they love to speak to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because reading the Qur'an for the people of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is speaking to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And those people, they loved Allah more than they love people. They love to speak to Allah more than they love to speak to people. When Abu Amr al-Basri, when he dies, and people have gathered around him, one of those who's present, Yunus ibn Habib, he said, Wallahi, by Allah, if the knowledge of Abu Amr and the piety of Abu Amr was spread across 100, shared out amongst 100 people, they would all be people of knowledge and all be people of piety. And then Yunus ibn Habib, he said about him once he's died, Wallahi, had the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wasallam seen him, Abu Amr al-Basri, he would have been so happy. And there we have a testimony of one of the righteous. And he raised the question, ask yourselves the question, if Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam came now and saw you, how would he feel? Here we have Abu Amr al-Basri. Somebody says, and Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam would have been so happy to see him because he fulfilled his duty with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Here's 2 narrators, they're simply known. Their names are Hafs al-Duri and al-Susi. Those are the 2 narrators from Abu Amr al-Basri. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in.